Hi, everyone. My name is Brown Fahrenholtz, and today I'm presenting joint work with researchers from UC San Diego, George Mason, UC Berkeley, Informant Networks, EPFL and MPI, and NYU. This work focuses on rat malware and the people who use it. So RAT stands for Remote Access Trojan. This is a type of malware that lets attackers control an infected machine remotely. Rats are tools and do not have exploits themselves. An important distinction to make between rat malware and other types of scripted malware, like ransomware and botnets, is that rats are operated manually by a human operator. Rats are extremely feature-rich, providing their operators with a number of built-in features for exploiting the victim machine. These range from recording video through the webcam to automatically collecting passwords and keystrokes. In addition to being feature-rich, rats are highly accessible. A quick Google search reveals tutorials and download links, while communities and hacking forums provide experienced operational advice. So rats are easily accessible and feature-rich, so they get used for a variety of purposes. Voyeurs and those who want to spy on victims through their webcams often choose rats. Taking webcam spying a step further, attackers also use rats in sextortion and blackmail attempts. A rat was, for instance, the tool of choice in the infamous Miss Teen USA extortion case. And finally, rats are often used in surveillance operations against journalists and dissidents. For example, in the onset of the Syrian civil war, the Syrian government targeted political activists with a common rat disguised as a Skype encryption tool. So that's a good example of rats being used in targeted attacks. But it turns out that much more frequently, rats are used by attackers seeking to infect large quantities of users, where large here means in the hundreds. These attackers spread their malware through download links in YouTube comments or bundle it with cracked versions of Photoshop, any way to indiscriminately infect a large number of people. Regardless, we note here that the common theme in all of these cases is that rats are used to access the victim user rather than just their machine. So we've seen high-profile cases of rat use. This begs the question, what do rat operators do with compromised machines? More concretely, our goal is to understand at scale the common use patterns of rats in the wild. We know that rats facilitate criminal behavior. By gathering data on their use patterns, we can better understand the threats we're up against and inform our defensive strategies. So in order to answer this question, here's what we did at a high level. We obtained as many samples of DarkComet rat as we could from VirusTotal. We executed a subset of these in malware sandbox honeypots designed to look realistic. We recorded the network traces of all rat operator interactions with our sandboxes. And finally, we extracted the operator's command streams from the captured network traces so that we could see what each operator actually did with their rat. Next, I'm going to elaborate on our methodology a little bit, and then I'll spend the rest of the talk discussing the results that we got from these operators' command sequences. So we conducted the experiment as follows. We pulled 19,000 samples of DarkComet rat from VirusTotal. For those who aren't familiar, VirusTotal is a malware repository to which real users upload suspicious files. So presumably, some portion of the samples that we obtained are from active rat campaigns. Each one of these samples has a domain name or IP address that allows it to contact its operator. From these samples, we extracted over 13,000 operator domains and IPs. We continuously scanned these operators, shaking hands with them as per the DarkComet protocol, in order to monitor the uptime of the operators. We found almost 10,000 operators in total. 89% of these operator IP addresses were residential IPs. 37% were Turkish and 15% were Russian. They followed diurnal liveness patterns when they were adjusted to their time zone, meaning that they were likely human operators. Now, the main part of our experiment was the execution of malware samples in our own honeypots. We executed a total of 1,165 malware samples in our honeypots over the course of the experiment. We only submitted samples when we saw that their operators were online, so as to increase the odds of an operator actually interacting with our honeypots. Our honeypots were Windows 7 virtual machines. This is a screenshot from one of them. Our honeypots were made to look realistic with installed applications, a fleshed out file system, a dated browser history, and honey credentials to real protected accounts. So while running these malware samples in our honeypots for 4 weeks, we accumulated 777 interactions with live human operators. I'll spend the remainder of the talk focusing on the results we obtained from these interactions. Now, I want to touch on some inherent biases in our experiment that likely affected the behavior of the operators that we observed. First, we make no effort to emulate any specific target or individual with our honeypots. So attackers seeking a specific target may be dissuaded from interacting with our machines. Further, DarkComet is a highly available off-the-shelf rat and is popular with amateur operators and script kiddies. Our operator population is, as such, likely biased towards amateurs. We allow operators only 1 hour in our honeypots, so this precludes us from capturing any behavior of operators intending to return to our honeypots at a later date. And finally, our honeypots had limitations to their realism. In particular, we did not provide a webcam feed, and we had a restrictive network containment policy. All in all, a suspicious attacker could find reason to doubt that our honeypots were lived in. So with these biases in mind, let's take a look at our results. DarkComet offers over 150 different capabilities to its operators. However, the sessions we collected during our experiment shared 4 common types of action. The first of which is attempted access to the victim user through the webcam and microphone. What this graph means is that 31% of all sessions began their first action with attempted webcam or audio access, 13% for second action, and so on. And we'll return to this graph a couple times. DarkComet offers a number of what it calls spy functions. This image and the images in the next several slides are all stills from the actual DarkComet operator interface. 61% of operators attempted to access the webcam with this webcam capture function, and 26% attempted to access the microphone through sound capture. Recall that our honeypots do not offer webcam and microphone feeds, so determining the actual motivation for this access is not possible. But what's important to note here is that accessing the victim user is a very common action with all of our operators. Beyond webcam and microphone access, we see credential theft occurring often. DarkComet offers 2 primary solutions for credential theft. The first of which is an automated password collector that will look for passwords in common locations. 43% of operators used this function. We had seeded credentials in each of our honeypots, and we noted 13 access attempts outside of the honeypots themselves, many from Russian and Turkish language machines. Steam, the gaming platform, was often a target. The other solution is the installation of a keystroke logger. 31% of operators activated this. These numbers are surprisingly low, given that password collection is a one-click action. We believe that this indicates that some fraction of our operators are truly using rats recreationally without malicious intent. In addition to credential theft, we commonly witnessed operators engage with the file system. DarkComet offers a built-in remote file system browser, which 40% of operators used. 18% used it to upload their own files to the victim machine, many of which were hacking tools like SQL injectors. These would be attackers seeking to use the machine for its vantage point for launching attacks. Overall, 34 unique executables were uploaded in total, 19 of which were new to VirusTotal when we submitted them. Another 8% of operators used the file system browser to download files from the victim machine. Most commonly targeted were fake Bitcoin wallets that we had seeded throughout it and configuration files for Steam. So this brings us to the final and most common action, which is that of remote desktop or RDP. DarkComet offers a full remote desktop client, which operators can use to monitor the victim's desktop silently or to interact with it actively. A full 83% of operators used this feature, while 56% used it to interact with the victim's desktop actively. What's interesting here is that unlike the other actions we've discussed, this behavior is completely visible to a victim user. So over half of our operators showed no discretion at all when controlling an owned machine. Some operators needed to use remote desktop to deploy their hacking tools. For instance, one of the most commonly deployed tools was the Havij SQL injector. But we also had operators trying to set up machines as TeamSpeak servers, for instance. So remote desktop really shows you the whole range of operator motivations. So I've spent the past few slides discussing common operator actions individually, but it's also interesting to consider their sequence and how they relate to one another. For example, it's interesting to note that webcam and microphone access always occur early in the sessions and are actually never the last action performed by the operator. This suggests that access to the victim user may be the primary goal of most of our operators, or that operators might vet the system and check for a present user as their first action. On the other hand, file system interaction is actually never an initial action. It almost always follows remote desktop or webcam and microphone access. This further suggests that webcam access, along with remote desktop, may be actions operators perform to gauge their interest in the system before exploring it further. And finally, credential theft actually appears most frequently as the final action performed by the operator. This could indicate that some RAT operators' goals and interactions with the infected machines are as simple and brief as collecting passwords. So recall that the original goal was to understand what operators do with compromised machines. To condense this data into a more palatable format, we instead asked the following question: what resources are RAT operators after? We report that at least 45% of operators seek access to the victim user, climbing to 61% if we include webcam and microphone access attempts. 58% want to steal credentials, and 16% intend to use the victim machine's vantage point. This could be to deploy hacking tools or to launch network attacks. These categories are not mutually exclusive. One thing that stands out here is that a significant portion of operators are not using RATs to access the victim user, even though that's really the primary reason to use a RAT. What we think is happening here is that RATs are so easy to use and so highly available that operators are choosing them over more sophisticated tools. For instance, a RAT would not be your first choice to launch a denial of service attack, but we see this very phenomenon. And so this brings up an important point, which is that RATs seem to be a gateway into malicious online behavior. Our attackers' behavior, for the most part, was extremely indicative of amateurism. But RATs have made it trivial for amateurs to commit crimes and violations of privacy, and have practically gamified it. So another research question that we asked during this study was, could realistic honeypots serve as tar pit defenses against RAT campaigns? The point of a tar pit defense is to waste an attacker's time and effort, and RATs are a great candidate for this type of defense because they're used manually. We found that operators spent an average of 4 minutes in our honeypots, increasing to 7 minutes when they used remote desktop actively. This amounts in total to 53 hours of operator time wasted over the entire experiment, despite the fact that we ran 10,000 machine hours. It's unclear whether our honeypots had an appreciable impact on the RAT epidemic, but this is a non-trivial amount of time given how inexpensive VM hours are. Regardless, Our honeypots did have significant limitations to their realism. We think it would be interesting to conduct a more thorough study of the effects of various honeypot features on operator engagement. So to conclude, we obtained 777 interactive sessions with DarkComet operators. We found that the resources attackers seek are access to the victim user, credentials, and the machine's vantage point. And we gleaned that most of our attackers were amateurs based on their behavior, but are concerned with the notion of rats being an entry point to more serious activities. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Hi, Federico, Trend Micro. Thanks for your talk. I was wondering if you could share your experience in how much effort it was necessary to reverse engineer the protocol, and which were the most difficult aspects of this reversing, and how much you think could be generalized to like a more semi-automated approach to be able to have a set of rats. You put them in a box, you watch them running, and you sort of try to guess where the boundaries of the protocols are, right?
So that is actually a future experiment we're considering running, attempting to come up with a way to sort of more generally figure out what operations are being performed by operators. I will say that fortunately, DarkComet's protocol has been reversed 2,000 times, so we did not have any trouble figuring out that it's RC4 encrypted with a static key that's stored in the malware itself.
Right.
One of the more time-intensive parts of this study was reversing the command or decoding the commands themselves. So there were 150 different commands that we saw. None of them were very intuitive as to what they actually did. So that took us a good several weeks. But the actual decrypting of the protocol and understanding had been done by a number of researchers.
Yeah, that's okay.
We think that there is potential for API calls to be used rather than network traffic to understand high-level operator interactions.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Of course.
All right, let's thank the speaker again.